and I want to get back to what you wanted to talk about,
Sure,
because I think it's important.
Yeah, I think I did have something about a billboard, but maybe we should talk about agnosticism for a little bit, because
Sure.
we're running out of time, and then get to the billboard if we have time. The reason that I wanted to bring up agnosticism, a while back I had done some reading about Rome, ancient Rome. And one of the things I read that was interesting is that the different classes of Romans, and sometimes even according to your job, people wore clothing that identified them. Like if you were a member of a Senate, you had like a particular border that went on your tunic that identified you as a member of the Senate. And if you were a member of a certain class, you wore a certain type of clothing that identified you. It wasn't just a matter of that's an expensive looking tunic, so you must be upper class. There literally were like special cuts and styles of clothing that delineated where you fit in the society.
Do the colors fit in this too? Because I know purple is the regal color.
So they did have like the border would have been a specific color for the Senate. Well, one of the things I remember reading was that the common class wore the same clothing as the slaves, which I thought was a little bit weird, that you'd have all this delineation and then slaves wouldn't be delineated with a special type of clothing. Well, apparently, that was an issue that came up in the Roman Senate, and it came up more than once. And every time it came up, it would be voted down, and it was always voted down for the same reason, which was we do not want the slaves to be able to identify themselves when they're out in the market. So when the slaves were released into, the Roman slaves did things like go shopping for the family. It wasn't like they were chained in a house somewhere or locked in quarters. They went out and did daily duties and whatever. Well, they didn't want them to understand how big their numbers were in the main cities, because that was dangerous for the slaves to recognize that you had more slaves than you did citizens on any given day wandering around the market. So with that in mind, why I'm bringing that up is because I think that a lot of times anonymity works for people who discriminate. So if you want to discriminate, if you want to have somebody that you're going to step on and that you're going to treat badly and that you're going to defame, it helps to have that group disenfranchised, disorganized, and keep the individuals as anonymous as possible so that they can't identify one another.
Right.
And the more mixed up you can keep it, the more powerless you keep that group. And I think that there is a movement, and I think on some levels it probably is purposeful, but I think that on most levels that I experience, it's not purposeful. I think it's just the the confusion that sort of trickles down from the more purposeful, misleading comments that keep people confused about exactly what an atheist is. And a lot of times the confusion comes in with atheism and agnosticism, where a lot of people will say, I'm not an atheist, I'm an agnostic. And I know we've hit this before, and if you go online, it's hit sort of ad nauseum, but I just think that it's very important to keep in mind that it's not just a definition. This is not just a semantic issue. This is an issue that keeps a lot of people who are atheists from even understanding that they're an atheist, and even understanding that, what atheism actually is. Because I probably run into as many atheists who are confused about this as I do theists.
Yeah.
So let's just look at a little bit of information about agnosticism and see where that goes. Let's see. It's a philosophical view that the truth value of certain claims, particularly metaphysical claims regarding theology, afterlife, or the existence of gods, deities, or even ultimate reality, is unknown or, depending on the form of agnosticism, inherently unknowable due to the nature of subjective experience perceived by that individual. So what they're saying is, you're either going to say that you don't know it or that you don't think anyone can know it. So in other words, there's this realm in which you personally have no knowledge, or where you will assert that no one has any knowledge. And the realm is generally religion with regard to agnosticism.
And not just that no one has any knowledge, but potentially that no one could have knowledge.
Yeah, right.
There is the idea that the question itself is nonsensical, that it can't be answered, that it's beyond
Correct.
our ken forever and all time.
Right, and that's something that is it's sort of, you can go that route. You don't have to. You can say that it's unknown to us right now, but we might know it later. or you can say it's unknown now and it's just unknowable ever, but this is where agnosticism is coming from. There's a lot of different definitions for agnosticism that they listed in, this is just a little bit of overview on Wikipedia, and we're going to get into also a little bit more from Britannica, but they list strong agnosticism as the view that the question of the existence or non-existence of an omnipotent God and the nature of ultimate reality is unknowable by reason of our natural inability to verify any experience with anything but another subjective experience. So that would sort of be the person sitting around saying, we can't really know anything, because we're just subjective beings and we just know it's almost like the Matrix type of philosophy.
It's
where,
kind of a nihilistic...
Right. I might be a brain in a jar. I can't tell what's real. I don't know.
Solipsism.
Right. And I mean, there's certainly something to be said for it, but you can't live your life as though you're a brain in a jar. So,
and we've had, I can't count the number of conversations about this, and a lot of this comes down to this notion of absolute certainty, which I'm sure we'll touch on at some point. So.
Yeah. Mild agnosticism is the view that the existence or non-existence of God or gods is currently unknown, but it is not necessarily unknowable. Therefore, one will withhold judgment until or if more evidence is available. So in other words, I can't say that God exists. I don't know whether or not it does, so I can't really say I believe until I have some more information. The apathetic agnostic is the view that there is no proof of either the existence or non-existence of God or gods, but since any God or gods that may exist appear unconcerned for the universe or the welfare of its inhabitants, the question is largely academic anyway. So what they're saying is, I don't see a reason to believe in God, but if there is a God, he doesn't appear to be involved, so what difference does it make? That would be the apathetic agnostic. The pragmatic agnostic is the view that there is no proof of either the existence or non-existence of gods. So that's sort of the unknown, I guess, for now, because they're saying there's no proof. I don't know if they would accept that there could be proof later. The model agnostic, the view that philosophical and metaphysical questions are not ultimately verifiable, but that a model of malleable assumptions should be built upon rational thought. This branch of agnosticism does not focus on a deity's existence. And I think that model agnosticism is close to Huxley's version of it, that there is no, they're not verifiable, but that you need to build your assumptions on rational thought. Agnostic theism is the view of those who do not claim to know the existence of God or gods, but still believe in the existence. And then you have agnostic atheism, the view of those who do not know of the existence or non-existence of God or gods and do not believe in them. And they further flip-flop that and say atheist agnostic, the view that God does not exist unless he exists outside of time and space. However, one cannot reasonably assume that outside of space and time even exists, nor can one assume that outside of space and time doesn't exist. Therefore, the God claim can never be asserted outside of logic, but based on logic, God does not exist. And agnosticism was something that I guess I hadn't heard in a while, but when I reread it recently, I was like, well, I like that word, and I like that definition. The view that a coherent definition of God must be first put forward before the question of the existence of God can meaningfully be discussed. And I definitely think that's a very valid view. You can't really talk about existence or non-existence of God unless somebody throws down a definition of what they mean by God. Generally on this program, we deal with the mainstream, I think, general Christian view of it, right, even though that still encompasses many different beliefs.
Well, I'm more than happy, I've made this point before. I'm interested in what people believe. I'm interested in why they believe it. More importantly, I'm interested in why they think someone else should believe it. And so, when I ask somebody about what they believe with regard to God, oddly enough, very few people actually begin by defining what they believe is God or objecting to my generic definition. Right. You tell me what it is that you believe, define it as best you can, and then we can actually have a discussion about it. And if you tell me that God is love, well, congratulations. By your definition, I'm a theist because I believe that love actually exists conceptually and not as a thing, or perhaps as a chemical state. In any case, why do that? Why say God is love? Or why don't you say love? There are two words. They're supposed to have slightly distinct meanings. One of them is supposed to have, this value add that distinguishes it from some other word, and you're equating the two of them. It's like equating philosophy and religion. They're different. They're subsets. For example, religion is a subset of philosophy and maybe a step cousin. But if you just say, well, religion's just a philosophy or philosophy is just a religion, no, you're oversimplifying, and you're doing it. These people who say that God is love, congratulations, you're an atheist in any practical sense of the word. If you think that God is just love, that there's no actual intelligence behind it, and then what you're doing really is saying, I don't believe in a God in any traditional sense, but because admitting that I'm an atheist would be difficult and uncomfortable and come with a lot of baggage, I think that I'm just going to define myself as perhaps a spiritual person, or say that love is God. God is love. Hey, there works. I believe in a God. It's love. And now all of a sudden, you think that you seem eminently reasonable to everybody around you, that you haven't taken this hard line that God doesn't exist, and you haven't snubbed the religious people by pretending that, or by claiming that that their beliefs aren't justified, or that you find them delusional, or that you don't share them. You've tried to appeal to everybody, and but in doing so, you've taken two words that actually have meaning, that actually convey ideas that are useful for communicating, and you've rendered them both useless. You have devolved language to the point that it's meaningless. If something can mean anything to anyone, then it means nothing to no one. There's a reason why we use distinct terms for this. And I think that God is love people are posers. But, I do agree with him. Love's a great thing.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to get to here is the idea that agnosticism is not, there is no choice between atheism and agnosticism. You can be atheist and agnostic,
right,
and you can be theist and agnostic. But theist and agnostic, it doesn't quite go together in a logical fashion. I think that, and I guess I have some issues with the question of the theistic agnostic, in that whenever I tend to discuss the theism with someone who claims to also be an agnostic, what I find is that they begin coming up with attributes for this God that they don't know.
Yeah.
So that what happens is you have a God that you claim you have no knowledge of, that you believe in, and then I get these continuing attributes for the God. So it's like, not only do they believe in a God that they say they don't know anything about, but then they start telling me about the God that they aren't supposed to know anything about.
Right.
So, for example, I had a discussion online with someone who said that he was agnostic. He labeled himself as agnostic, but then went on to say that he felt that the thing that made him think there could be a God is that the universe is very orderly in his opinion, and therefore, he thinks that there's got to be something that put it together. Well, when I'm looking at this, I'm saying, first you say you're an agnostic, which means you're saying that you know nothing about God. Then you're turning right around and saying that you think a God created the universe. Well, that's something about God. Now, you may preface that with believe versus know, and you're getting on iffy territory there, but the next thing to say is that if that God did create that universe, then he would make an orderly universe. So now you're telling me that the God you don't know anything about you think is orderly, and there's no reason for it because you don't know anything about this God, and also that this God created the universe, which you have no reason to believe that since you say you're an agnostic and you know nothing about God.
Yeah,
so why are you, well, it's like why continue to build your assumptions and build more and more assumptions about something that you've already established you know nothing about? It would be like me sitting here trying to talk about physics, and I know nothing about it, so I'm going on and on about physics, just making stuff up. I mean, that's exactly what it is. And then say, finally get to the end of it and say, but I never claimed I knew anything. I'm just saying what I think.
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of a dishonest. I mean, people, we see this all the time where people think the words are interchangeable. They'll say, I'm an agnostic, and then go on to talk about what they believe or don't believe. When belief isn't an issue with agnosticism, we're talking about its knowledge. You may well be an agnostic. and yet you may still believe in a God or disbelieve in a God for a variety of reasons. And, okay, if you say you're an agnostic and then you start defining the characteristics of a God you believe in, what you're really doing is saying, I don't know for sure, but I believe. And my belief that this is possible is based on presumptions that I'm making about characteristics about a God. And while I agree that still doesn't qualify as knowledge, it does put your agnostic position on very shaky ground.
Well, and it puts your theism on a completely illogical level, because what happens then is that you're basically saying that in the absence of any knowledge, I'm just making up all this stuff that I believe about God and gods.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so, and that's valid, why?
Yeah.
And it reminds me, one of the quotes, let me see if I can find it. Oh, I loved it. I just highlighted it earlier, and I thought, oh, that's just worth repeating. And now I'll probably not be able to find it, but it said something about.
Well, while you're looking for that, I'll remind everybody that it's a little after 4 now. We're on to 4:30. As a reminder, we'll be going to El Arroyo on 5th Street after the show's over, starting around 5 o'clock, lasting till 7-ish or maybe a little bit later. Any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to come down and join us. If you're coming down to punch me in the face, don't bother. I was thinking about that with the guy from the other day. If you want to call back in sometime or email me, I think we may be able to create a fundraiser where we have a boxing match, and maybe split the winning 60-40 with the winner. So if you knock me out, you get 60% of it. Maybe we can sell some tickets. Who knows?
I found the quote. It was on a different article.
Oh.
It was from Britannica. That's why it wasn't in my sheets. But the British mathematician and philosopher of science, W.K. Clifford, and this is from 1876, in his essay on the ethics of belief, says, "It is wrong always, everywhere, and for everyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence."
I couldn't agree more.
So if a person is telling me, I know nothing about God, but God created the universe, I think, because otherwise I don't know how it's here, and I think God is really orderly, and that's why we have an orderly universe, and you start, the more you tell me about God, if you continue to call yourself an agnostic, you're basing it on zero. You're just making things up, and so I agree with Clifford in saying that you're wrong, always, everywhere, and no matter who you are, if you're telling me that you believe anything upon insufficient evidence. And when you say agnostic, you're saying zero evidence, zero knowledge. You're admitting to zero knowledge and then going on to tell me what you think you know.
Yeah, there's this kind of idea in colloquial speak, and I wish I could say there's nothing wrong with it. I do have a problem with it. Many times in casual communication, like theory takes on a different meaning than it does in scientific theory. Agnostic takes on certain meanings. Atheist takes on certain meanings, and they're probably fine. The average Joe, when he says atheist, he's talking about somebody who says there is no God. Well, on some level, as long as you're willing to talk about things that loosely, kind of street level view of it, yeah, okay, that's an okay definition of an atheist. And as a matter of fact, I'll happily say it. There is no God. But what I'm doing is I'm making a statement about what I believe and not what I know to any absolute degree of certainty. When we start making distinctions and we start talking about, actual philosophical positions, atheist has a distinct definition, and that is a lack of theism or without theism. It's a response to a theistic position. And the one thing is that the reason I don't define God and say, this is God and I don't believe in him, is because I think that's insane. I'd rather have you define God and then have a discussion about whether or not I believe in the God you believe in and why. Not just because I think it's a way to clarify things. I think it's the only way to really have a good communication about it. What it does is it allows both of us to learn something. I learn what your idea of a God is. I learn why you believe in it. I learn why you think other people should believe in it. I can then assess that and find out where I agree and where I disagree, because I think there are many, many areas where we would agree more than we disagree, but we're going to stumble over certain presuppositions that individuals have. For example, Ray Comfort, we talked about him a little bit on yesterday's show, where he's got this thing, I think atheists evolved from, I'm not going to try and do his accent, he's from New Zealand. He thinks atheists evolved from chicken, and it was just a little humorous, almost, attack on atheists. saying, you guys are out here attacking Christians, but you're afraid to attack Muslims. Are you kidding me? My coffee cup is named Muhammad. I'm not afraid to talk about what I disagree with and other beliefs. There's and I'm forgetting where this is taking place, if somebody can remind me. There's a young woman in another country that's being potentially executed for witchcraft. Why? Because she made a man impotent, supposedly, by witchcraft. She's illiterate. They hand her a confession that she can't read, that they didn't read to her. It's in Saudi Arabia, and they have her sign it with a thumbprint. She's illiterate. She can't read the confession. The confession isn't read to her, and yet they put her thumbprint on it, and now they're going to execute her because some guy claimed that she used witchcraft to make him impotent. Now, not only, as Dennis pointed out, are we no longer living in the 14th century, I came up with a solution. Let's send Viagra to Saudi Arabia so they'll stop killing women because they're, well, I won't say that. It's insane. I realize that there's people all around the world that have different social structures, and they haven't all progressed to the same state. And some of them have been, the progress has been retarded by religion. Some of it has been prompted by religion. I'll happily admit that religion's responsible for some great universities that helped bring the world into a new century. But it was still fighting against itself. The reason for those universities is because they needed scribes. They needed people who were literate. And the progress is a sort of byproduct of that was unintended. No, it's not like the church has said, I think if we start teaching people, maybe we'll start learning new things and the world will get better and we'll be able to cure diseases and live longer and come up with fabulous new technologies that make life easier and more wonderful. People in different areas have progressed at different rates. We need to find out what's inhibiting the progress, what is promoting progress, and make changes globally, starting locally, so that never again do I need to hear some nonsense that some guy couldn't get it up and decided to go after an illiterate woman and blame her, and now she's subject to be executed unless the king steps in? Are you kidding me? I mean, granted, I got sidetracked from the agnosticism and atheism discussion, but, people say, well, what's the harm in religion? Okay, well, there's one of them. Oh, yes, but, guys like Ray Comfort, which is why I got sidetracked, would say, well, you don't attack Muslims, you attack Christians. I don't attack Muslims or Christians. I attack ideas. All ideas. Any idea is open to criticism, to critical evaluation, to skepticism. And the stupider it is, and the more close to home it is, the more I'm going to attack it. So if you ask me why I focus more on Christians, it's because I live in a country where 80% of people are Christians. And you know what? I don't think that many of them actually believe the things that are dogmatic and asserted from the pulpit. I think they believe in belief, as Daniel Dennett points out. I think they go to socialize. I think, as Jacek, our first caller today, I don't think that many of them perhaps actually believe in hell. I don't think that many of them are that concerned over it. They're going through the motions. And you know what? I'm happy for those people because they perhaps have the chance to escape from the shackles of religion. But don't pretend that, Ray, if your best argument is that, well, you can attack us, but Muslims are worse. That's your best argument? The best thing you can come up with is that atheists are afraid to attack Muslims and Muslims are worse than Christians? Okay. If that's your best argument, I rescind my offer to debate you at any time because it'd be pointless. You come with arguments like the banana is the atheist nightmare. You talk about, atheists were evolved from chickens, partly because you don't understand evolution, and partly because you don't understand atheists, and partly because you're just backtracking as fast as you can, because you put out these Way of the Master series, and we offer point-by-point, second-by-second rebuttals. You can go to ironchariots.org to find those. You put out these blog posts, and you get atheists coming in to say, no, you missed the point. This is it, and you're wrong. Here's this, and you're wrong. You're making all kinds of wild assertions, and you've got nothing to back it up. Your best argument is that we're not Muslims. Christianity, it's not Islam. Good for you.
Get a bumper sticker.
Oh, my gosh. I feel like I'm channeling Pat Condell right now, but...